Thibeau, and for many years I helped lead the foundation with Nat and others. I also founded the Open Identity Exchange, so that we have in the ecosystem foundations focused on technical standards or tools, and governance and legal and liability issues, rules. So tools and rules are part of the plumbing of ecosystems and identity systems at large.
Hi, John Bradley. I'm the OpenID Foundation treasurer, so I will be checking your wallets as you leave the room. I've been involved in pretty much all of the OpenID standards since OpenID 2. I'm currently also working on WebAuthn and FIDO editing. So I am involved in a fair number of identity projects and trying to advance the future of OpenID as we go forward into wallets and various other things. I'm provoking him.
Buongiorno, everybody. My name is Vittorio Bertocci. I work for Zero, a product unit of Okta. And I've been working in the identity space for a couple of decades, but unlike I was a fine gentleman, mostly as a blue collar, as in it's been my personal mission to help developers work with identity. And so I did everything in my power to simplify standards for them or make standards that are friendly for developer use cases, creating content, evangelizing, and only recently I ascended to a board. And so now I can also pretend to influence strategic decisions. So a bit more white collar.
Okay. So thank you to the board members and myself. I am Gail Hodges. I am the executive director of the OpenID Foundation. And I've only been the executive director for about a year, taking over from Don. But it's really been my pleasure to work with such a warm community, like truly, authentically, a warm community who have fantastic intentions to solve real problems. And it's years of commitment from many members of the community. And we're actively going out of our way to encourage new members, young and old, and from different spheres to get more involved in the work of the foundation, because we really need much wider participation to deliver on our mission and our vision. Into the show. So I'm sure a large number of you are pretty familiar with the OpenID Foundation, have probably even seen this slide. But I'm going to call on a few members. Don, tell us, how widely deployed, bit of trivia, how widely deployed is our OpenID Foundation standards?
Very wide. I would submit that you're using OpenID Connect today. You're using many of the standards that have originated from the technologists on the dais and many of you in the audience. The most important thing that you can take away from this notion of OpenID Connect is that it's plumbing, it's infrastructure. If we do our jobs right, no one will know, and everyone will assume that identity is done well. But OpenID Connect really has become a fundamental part of many ecosystems' infrastructure. You can't understand identity, or for that matter, open banking, without understanding the role that OpenID Connect plays. So if you're part of the Capital One team, becoming fluent in OpenID Connect allows you to speak financial-grade API standards, for example. So I think our mission is really fundamental. It's infrastructure. It's building on the standards that exist today and making identity systems at scale possible. So most of the globe uses OpenID Connect, and we hope that it's something that you can build on as well.
Thank you, Don. And we estimate over 3 billion users are using OpenID Connect. It's across millions of applications. It's incredibly widely deployed, thanks to the hard work of the people on the stage as well as the community.
As a matter of fact, if you're using OpenID Connect and you look at Facebook Connect, you'll see a very close cousin.
So Nat, you're in a lot of different standards bodies. What's unique about the OpenID Foundation?
So we are very open. It's an open participation forum, right? It doesn't cost anything to join the working groups. You just need to sign up for the working group and sign off the IPR agreement that whatever you're speaking there is going to be taken, and whatever you're contributing there technically you actually have, if you have patent, you have to actually provide it royalty free, but that's pretty much it. You don't have to do the search, you just make a promise, right? So it doesn't take anything much, except for your own work time to participate into this forum, and it's kind of rare, right? And in many standard body, you actually have to go through a lot of bureaucracies to get on the forum itself, and then you are bound by confidentiality agreement and things like that. But whatever we do in OpenID Foundation is completely transparent.
Thanks.
Well, we are open,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Crucial, right? It's in our name, but we're open, and it is truly free to participate and contribute to the working groups. We obviously encourage membership, and John will talk about that in a moment, but it's really a unique feature and helps with the adoption that we see now. Vittorio, why are the standards still relevant today?
That is a very good question. How many of you fine folks are using SAML today? All right. You might have heard it's dead, but it's undead. That's to say that it's still among us, it's still moving, but it's not growing and it's not changing. How many of you guys use APIs? Fantastic. Mobile apps. All right, excellent. So SAML has been working really well for many years for web apps, but as you all know, if you also want in your solution to have APIs, mobile apps, and similar, you have to do something else because SAML won't get you there. And OpenID is instead designed to cover the entire breadth of the scenarios that we have today, and it's actively, as you'll hear, working on tackling the scenarios that we'll have to deal with tomorrow. And that is the big difference, and that's why OpenID is relevant in the mainstream, because as you heard from the adoption numbers, everyone is using OpenID, but at the same time, this is also the thing that will let you expand your solutions to all of those other topologies. And also, we have a number of interesting dark clouds gathering at the horizon. You'll hear a bit more later, but our fine friends in browser land are doing their best to block unsanctioned tracking of users. And as a result, they're just slashing support for some of the basic primitives that the area identity standards rely on. And so it's very possible that we will have to change and adapt to that. OpenID is ready, because we are working on that literally every day. Whereas SAML convincing an undead to do new tricks is going to be tricky.
Thank you very much, Vittorio. And as a quick service announcement, we're here for an hour, so if anyone would like to come sit down, there's lots of seats up here on this side or right in the front row, so feel free. You won't be disrupting if you walk on up. In terms of existing members, you will recognize a lot of household names on there, but also a lot of small businesses and individuals are active contributors to the foundation. We have over 300 contributors to the foundation, and there's also a lot of government stakeholders who are actively participating to make sure our standards are fit for service for what their requirements are. And we also, I'm going to come to you, John, it's good to kind of talk about where our funding sources come from. How do we give away the keys to the kingdom, as Nat was saying? Unlike other standards body, how do we do all this for free for the community?
So as Nat pointed out, we are fundamentally different. We don't charge for our specifications like ISO. We don't charge large amounts for enterprises to join the standards organization like W3C, where you have to be a member of a participating organization to even engage in the discussions. So everybody can come and participate as long as you meet the base requirements, that if you do have a patent, you won't assert it on the specifications that you participated in. So that's about as open as you can get for a standards organization. The downside of that is that we don't really have any way of extorting money out of people, at least not as effectively as some of the other standards organizations. So we rely on the largesse of our sustaining members, which provide about 1/3 of our funding. There are also organizations that have contributed direct funding over the years, people who want a specific project, i.e., I want a
profile.
I want a particular conformance profile or testing suite being developed. We've had nation states do directed funding saying, I want this test suite because my banking industry needs to have a way of checking that they can actually interoperate, as an example. So we've had governments give us directed funding. We've had large corporations give us directed funding for different projects that they specifically want. And about a third of our revenue comes from recovering the costs of doing certification. So anybody can use our certification test suite. There's no charge for that. If you want to be able to publish that you passed a particular conformance, so we have a listing and you pay for essentially having somebody check the results of your conformance and go into the listing service. So that's about a third of our budget, is essentially covering the costs of the people that we have writing the tests and providing the day-to-day support for hand-holding the people to go through the tests. So, we also have individual members who want to contribute. So there's a small fee if you want to be an individual member and get to vote.
$50, people.
Yeah.
$50.
You get to vote
You can
for
probably handle it.
So you can vote for the OpenID board and vote me out as treasurer. I encourage everybody to do that. Join and vote against me.
Thank you, John.
Just to add one thing to John's, the important investment you make is not monetary. It's really your time. And I think investing your time is really profound, not only for the foundation, because we aggregate the time and talent, but I think it's also important for you and your career and your team and your company, because participation in work groups allows you direct contact with the experts in the field, but also a real sense of how technology in the field is moving in advance of the mainstream, so that it educates you in a very profound way.
Absolutely. Moving on. Actually, this is going to go right back to you, Don, so watch out.
I thought something was coming my way.
So it's always good to kind of talk about some of the use cases of where OpenID Foundation standards are currently deployed, because it's often that we're in a particular silo and we don't appreciate the scale of adoption, because we're often pigeonholed in people's minds, even leading technologists, that it's about social logins, and it's really transcended social logins for a long time now. So Don, walk us through.
As Gail said, we began with logins, and you can see the effect of that now some 10 years later. But more importantly, if you have a sense of how the identity ceremony, the user experience is at login, it really advantages you as you begin to add other value-added use cases and applications, other standards to the mix. So what you see on the chart in front of you is the point that I made earlier, which is that, in my view, you can't do open banking effectively unless you understand open identity. That the standards that are now being developed that support the plumbing of open banking really originated in identity. So whether it's open banking or health or zero trust, all of us in this room would I think, agree that identity plays a crucial role. And how identity manifests itself is in standards, in open standards, the scaffolding, if you will, for the services that you want to build for your enterprise and your clients and customers. So the growth of a standard, as we've talked about here, and the work groups really is at the heartbeat of what the foundation is. And so as Gail suggested and John invited, whether you're an individual or an organization or a team, I think there's a lot to be learned and a lot to contribute in the kinds of standards development that we see happening again and again in legacy markets as well as some of these new emerging markets.
Fantastic. So we're going to talk more about one of those particular use cases. So the financial grade API, for those of you who haven't spent a lot of time following the movement of open banking and open data and open health, is really cascading around the world. Nat, maybe you can share some of your observations as working group chair for the FAPI standard. Where are you seeing the adoption of this standard and the trends in the market?
You want to say something?
I was going to.
Please.
A funny thing happened in the FAPI working group, and that is its name was changed. And as those of you that are in the standards world, you never make a change without a discussion. And you each word you use in a standard, and certainly the title of a standard, has import. So Nat, if you could tell the story of how FAPI became financial grade API, that might be a good way.
All right, so FAPI originally started as a financial API. And, we were kind of laser focused to the open banking or open investment of insurance kind of use cases. And for that, we actually needed to have a higher security profile to lock down the loose parts, right? And we, along the way, we actually created a bunch of companion specifications, like Auth MTLS was outgrowth of these things, and many others, right? And yeah, so it picked up actually in UK as part of the open banking standards. A lot of people talk about open banking as associated with PSD2 in Europe, but the open banking itself actually predates that. It was about how to share the data so that the account can be portable. So that was one of the starting points for the UK, and so I was actually the conference chair for one of the open banking workshop or seminar down there, and then a lot of people came to me, and we thought that it's a good idea to actually do the work, and our travel started like that, and it started spreading, and as it spreads out, there are people from other industries like airline industries or healthcare industries saying, okay, this looks very useful for us. We are also using in the high assurance kind of environment, but we can't use as long as you name it as financial API, because we are not financial. And so among the working groups and also in the board, we discussed what can we do, and then we had a lot of discussion, but in the end, we said, okay, financial grade should be good enough, right? And so we changed the name, and here we are. And now we're leaning towards just saying FAPI, right? Because it became so common among those people. So we're even kind of dropping the financial grade API, spelled out thing, just call it FAPI these days. And in this map, it's just a partial list. We are not covering everything, right? And it's actually not from us, it's from Consensus. So that's the kind of image that you can generally get what's going on in open banking space, right? Yeah. And a lot of them are actually relying on FAPI.
Yeah, I think we have at least 6 that we know have adopted FAPI and started implementing already. And quite a few markets are evaluating FAPI, like Canada is going through their open banking evaluation process now. Nigeria just published their requirements from the government. We're expecting them to adopt FAPI. And several Middle Eastern markets that we know are seriously evaluating FAPI at the moment too. But we know that in that picture of global deployment, many of you will also be familiar that there's specific domestic implementations like in India and in Singapore, some of which predate FAPI. And this is an example of the challenge, right? Approaching things on a domestic basis, kind of undermining the potential for global interoperability. So any given government or market entity, market ecosystem entity that might be private-led is often thinking, I care about my market, I have to solve this for my market first, and isn't looking a couple steps down the road to the need for consent-based sharing of data across borders or enabling those transactions across borders. Or thinking about, well, what does that mean for the existing payment networks that operate cross borders for the Visa, MasterCard, American Express, SWIFT networks? Well, what's gonna happen when this goes global? Which is gonna come, right? So how is that all gonna play out? So we're gonna have a couple talks this week. One is gonna be tomorrow, talking about how to implement FAPI effectively, how to implement open banking effectively, and we're going to dive into those themes, so please come along to that session if you'd like the overview. And we'll talk in a moment about what are the primers, a white paper we just wrote, to better characterize that full picture of what's happening market by market and the trends and the implementation challenges. Hard to put Nat on the spot and get him to cover all of the work that's happening in open banking, much less in open data and the work cutting across verticals. But Nat, maybe you can share a little bit around the financial challenge, because it's tough to put numbers around identity and the identity challenges we're facing, but the financial service sector gives us a proxy for the problem.
Yeah, so
Sorry. There
can
you go.
just build them. Yeah. So a few moments ago, we talked about identity being the center of all these things. I mean, for example, in the case of financial transactions, if you can't identify the originator and destination and the message itself, I mean, if you can't authenticate them in a pretty highly secure manner, you're kind of screwed. And it actually is the case for us right now. So this is a figure about the money laundering and illicit fund. So for 1,000 illegal, I mean, the scale is just humongous, right? Financial crime costs, it is said that up to 5% of GDP. That's a lot. And are we effectively, coping with that? No. With a $1,000 worth of illegal funds, we are just catching $1, so just 0.1%. And to catch that $1, we are spending $100 for the compliance cost.
So we're doing a great job, everybody.
We have to do something about this, right? And so Gail has kindly put some numbers here, right? So for the money laundering, it's 800 million to 2 trillion, a billion to 2 trillion money laundering, right? And 170 billion for cybersecurity reserve and 13 billion for IM revenue. So it's a huge market. And the wrongdoers are using their scalable technologies. We are, regulators are only equipped with the linear technologies, and with the current pace, it's a losing battle. So we have to, collaboratively do something about it.
Clearly, I think everyone can appreciate and is familiar with the problem here, but maybe not everyone instantly draws the connections with cyber war, right? If you're not working directly in cybersecurity. Nat, you're going to be talking I know you have to step out early to prepare for your next session at 11:30 on this topic. Can you share?
Oh yeah, so I'll be hosting a session about titled Identity in Conflict, right? So we kind of scrambled to create a session because of the current situation in Europe, right? And the first thing that happens in that kind of situation is that your cyber infrastructure is going to be attacked and pretty much damaged. And we have to do something about that to cope with the problems effectively. And that's what we are going to be discussing at 11:30, I think, in the next room, Cottonwood 6 and 7. So I'm not going to take more time on this. If you're interested in this kind of topic, please come to the session. So there's a guy from who's helping the Ukrainian government to explain about the situations, and it's for discussion. Unfortunately, the guy who was flying from Ukraine to here actually couldn't get permission to leave his country, so we kind of have to impersonate what he was going to say, but still, it's going to be a good discussion, I think.
Yeah, but so clearly crucial issues, right? I know many of us, get paid our daily bread to solve the financial services problems on the prior page, and often it's, the governments who are trying to solve the cybercrime issues, but it's the same primitives, right? It's the same core underlying problems. And if we as a community can't create better infrastructure, then we're going to continue to suffer the consequences. A tax on our income, right? Our resources, our money as consumers going into the pockets of bad actors, and enabling really, really negative consequences. You know, it's life and death as well.
If we can't help this kind of situation as in the industry collectively, what's the value, right? We have to lend our hand.
Yeah, it's not somebody else's problem, it's our problem, right? And no one person, no one company, no one government can solve these problems alone. This is a collective challenge and a collective problem. Because for sure, the bad actors are organized, and we often talk about it, but the OpenID Foundation is one of those safe spaces to convene and work on the real solutions. So let's talk a little bit more about the broader identity trends. Some are big upsides, huge opportunities, lucrative outlooks, and then some are truly negative implications of not getting stuff right. So let's talk about the wider themes. Vittorio, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. There on the page you see a lot of different trends. Some you might recognize, some might be new to you, but they are the reification of what I was describing earlier, that identity isn't a live thing that keeps changing. And the lessons that we learned and the problems that we solved 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago will not move us where we need to be. So if you start from the top right and you see this convergence of digital and physical identity, I am a very well-known skeptic in the SSI world, but that particular trend to me is the most important that is emerging from that area and the most concrete. You might have heard about mobile driving licenses and all these various efforts which span across multiple standardization bodies that try to take some of the practices that we've been doing as a society for centuries and basically now take advantage of the existing infrastructure that at this point is mature because now we have a digital identity everywhere and try to project those elements to actually work also in the digital. And it is not an easy problem. Let's say that it's easy to look at the naive way of doing this and just reproduce in the cyberspace what we do on a daily basis with our driving licenses, but that doesn't work that way. Because as soon as you get in the digital world, there are different ways of using things, different ways of potentially abusing things. And so there's a lot of effort, both from the ISO, from OpenID, and to find ways of taking those new standards and make them productive and effective in the context of the flows that we are already doing, and fashioning new flows that will be actually sustaining the new use cases in there. And we have a large number of sessions this week about verifiable credentials. I invite you to go. The people that give us sessions are the protagonists of it. And so not only the content is of extraordinarily high quality, but they are the best people to answer your questions. So take advantage of that they're here and they can't shy away. If you ask them questions, they have to answer.
Before you move on to the next point, if I can just add to that, on the convergence of physical and digital identities, you know, we as the foundation are actively advising governments on this problem, right? Because they're trying to figure out how to knit together all these standards that aren't knit together very elegantly yet. And as one example, a week and a half ago, we were briefing the EU Digital Wallet EIDAS-2 technical working group, expert working group, with about 70 or 100 people represented from different countries and other private sector experts on how our standards can help them solve their architectural reference framework problems. They've created policies to solve these problems, but the underlying standards are not quite there yet. So that can be both a tremendous opportunity to use their policies as a forcing mechanism to create the convergence, to take the skeptics and turn it into real, viable, globally scalable solutions. But that's real work that has to get done. And that's one example. I'm also, in my spare time, advising the state of California. Nat is an advisor to the state, to the government of Japan, and there are other examples, I'm sure, around the world. But numerous countries are struggling with how to do this in practice. So again, we seek to be the safe space to truly advise governments on what good looks like, right? So it's a better place for residents around the world. Please.
And on the antipod, like bottom left, you see identity foundations. And Identity foundations sound like something that we already figured out. Again, everyone uses OpenID Connect, but the reality is that, again, we are not done. Things keep moving. And on one side, we are finishing the foundation. So, for example, the emerging OpenID Federation standard is our way to completely match the things that today SAML does in the context of education, government, and similar. But there are other things that require us to adapt. So you see on the top right, the browser redirects. Basically, what that part means is that, well, as I mentioned earlier, browsers are introducing constraints that, for example, will either prevent you from doing redirects in your browser, or they'll allow you to do so by stripping all the parameters, which basically make any identity interaction impossible. And also, I'm sure you heard about the demise of third-party cookies. In particular, cookies are closer to us because it already happened, and it's imminent that it's going to happen completely across the board. And so we had to adapt by, in particular, looking at the way in which we do distributed sign-out, which was predicated on the ability to use third-party cookies. And so now we are advising the community to use one of the other standards which we put together, which helps with that particular area. So without giving you the laundry list, there's still a lot of work which is happening at the foundation level. And then the last thing I'll say, I know that Italian accent is hard to follow. I don't want you to strain. The vertical convergence is basically what Nat was saying about FAPI. There is a universal need of raising the bar in terms of security, in terms of reliability, in terms of interoperability across multiple domains, disciplines, verticals. And so what we are observing is that we are cross-pollinating. The learnings from one particular vertical can be applied almost verbatim to others. And so FAPI is one concrete example of where this is happening, but this is truly happening across the board. All right.
John.
Okay, I was supposed to cover what Vittorio didn't, which is close to nothing. I will observe, I can't even read it from here, actually. I will observe that a lot of countries are moving forward with OpenID Connect in their national ID systems. I know in my particular country, all of my COVID vaccinations were tracked through an OpenID Connect federated service, and my COVID pass that I have to show to go into bars and restaurants is also all part of that OpenID Connect service. And as more and more services, more and more critical government services go into that, that's where the FAPI standards are giving some folks assurance. Having certification tests to know whether or not people are actually conforming to the standards also helps people, governments and other organizations have confidence. Last week I was talking to the chief information security officers from across the US about cybersecurity. FBI invited me to a get-together in Norman, Oklahoma at a postal hotel. If I'm ever kidnapped, I'm going to wind up in a postal hotel.
This is from a guy who uses a Colorado license plate.
Yeah, I am the guy that they're all searching for. There was certain irony in that. But as we look at conflicts around the world, it's become clear that things that we haven't perhaps thought were all that important will become part of the front line, that police, fire, ambulance in the Ukraine, even the academic networks. I was just talking to some of the people from TNC. The academic networks in the Ukraine were attacked by the Russians. Infrastructure, when there are attackers, they will go after whatever the lowest bar is, and if they can do things to disrupt civil society, to create confusion on top of firing rockets at you, it's a compound effect. So, the U.S. has a number of adversaries, and should any of them get particularly annoyed, it may be hospital networks and police, fire, ambulance, electrical grids, all of that stuff that we need to actually make sure that we use standards like FAPI so that they're adequately protected from compromise.
Yeah. And you mentioned the US, but it's every country is facing the same
sure.
attack vectors, right?
But they look like gringos, so.
If I could, as Vittorio said, we have to find new ways of collaborating to keep these standards alive and well and modernized. I think we ask of you as members of the OpenID Foundation to collaborate with each other, to collaborate with competitors and colleagues that you may not have met before. I think it's a fair thing for you to ask of the foundation to do the same thing. And I'm really pleased that the OpenID Foundation, together with the Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation, the Cloud Signature Consortium, the Institute of International Finance, and the Open Identity Exchange are collaborating themselves, standards organizations that really have an eye towards the kind of international partnerships and collaboration that will be required to meet the needs that we have for interoperability in a changing IT environment and a changing global environment and regulatory environment.
Thank you, Don. And I'll just chime in on that COVID-19. So John briefly mentioned the experience in Chile, but that's clearly been an issue around the world, right? You know, all the testing processes, all of the vaccination distribution processes, very few countries, could you say, got it right in terms of trying to address the problem in real time because they can't pinpoint their residents effectively to deliver those services. So that's kind of laid bare, if you will, the problems with identity infrastructure and those identity foundations that we can't solve societal-wide problems like that when they attack us. So the threats are really coming from all sides. And we have a duty, you know, to work on those problems at all fronts simultaneously, which is why we need collaborations with other nonprofit entities that are other safe spaces to break up the problems, solve them, and collectively work on that together. So is your mind blown yet? Are we getting there? So I'm going to now introduce our Forest Rangers hats. So there are a few Forest Rangers on the table, on the stage, and then there are quite a few of you in the audience. I was struck by an analogy when drinking a glass of wine last Friday that had a tree with the roots underneath of it, and it reminded me of something. I love watching nature documentaries. You know, maybe there's a few of you in the crowd. But this analogy really, really hit me, that the foresters of the world now are adopting an analogy from us. They're calling themselves the wood wide web. Tell me that's not humorous. The trees are talking to each other. They're talking to each other thanks to fungal networks underneath the soil. And this is really a more recent discovery of the last 5 to 10 years, if you've been paying attention to as many nature documentaries as me. And if you've been focusing on identity standards, you might not have noticed that this is a really big deal in the science world. Mind blown, the trees are talking to each other. They're sharing threat signals with each other. When a giraffe is grazing on a tree, the tree has a defense mechanism and like changes the texture of the leaves, and then the giraffes have learned to walk in one direction. It's truly extraordinary. So in the forest, the we are funguses. No, the funguses are like the standards. So we have in the OpenID Foundation, in our 15 years of development, we are creating the standards, the interoperable connections between different networks in the same ways that the trees are talking to each other with their mycordial networks. They've had 370 million years to pull that together. We've had 15 years to develop these standards, and we're trying to address the problems we just showed you on the prior page. That's kind of a big task, right? You know, maybe we can learn some more from the trees, but we probably have to learn more from each other. So how are our standards doing this, right? We have the secure interfaces, the consent-based movement of data that's needed in policy today, we have the capabilities with shared signals and events to move the threat signals between different networks. We're connecting entities, people, networks, and things, IoT, right? All of it. And it doesn't matter if an individual network uses a trust over IP standard or has a verifiable credential flavor. You still have the opportunity to connect those networks with each other, right? So that's where our superpower fits in. And what the board realized is that the work we were already doing, all these use cases, the demands that we've just described were kind of coming out of left field. We started with financial services API, and then it became the financial grade API because it was needed to solve health problems in the US and, in Norway and various countries. And so what you're seeing is now connecting the networks of networks is the big concept, right? Open banking and open data, how do you globalize that around the world? Identity infrastructure with government-led capabilities, IoT devices, we haven't even scratched the surface of what's possible in IoT. Open health to solve those issues. It all needs to come together, right? That's a huge idea, but a worthy challenge for us to collectively work towards. So again, is your mind blown yet? Did you already have this idea 10 years ago? And all right, well, where were you if you've already thought this through? So, sorry, I missed an important page. Vittorio. So the strategic task force, saw these trends, saw these problems, saw the way that we could address them. How did we think about what our vision and our mission needed to be to direct our work going forward?
This was something very difficult to do. And one of the things that I'd say I'm the most proud of, because I think that the team did fantastic work. Doing identity standards is grinding work, which is full of tacticals. Every day you have to push for details. Reaching consensus is hard. So it's very difficult to zoom out and try to summarize in just few words what you really want to do. And also, you heard all of those trends, which are all completely different. Like in general, like there are some common traits, but like from where do you even start? And so we had to zoom out and really take in the big picture and think what really is important to us. And if we imagine the world 10 years from now and we succeeded, what would that world look like? And that is what led to our vision statement, which largely focuses on people. We want to empower people to assert their identities wherever they choose. And every word here has been painstakingly litigated. But we are now, the good news is that everyone is happy. Like we didn't get in there and someone is disgruntled. We are all fully behind that. And we believe that this is basically induces our mission, which is basically what can we do? What are the special powers that Gail mentioned that we can use to make that vision a reality? And that is largely working with the community and bring our expertise, bring our knowledge of what is happening in adjacent spaces, and help people to do things in an interoperable way, and by taking into account the things that they might not have thought of themselves, but that us, as people that have spent a long time in this space, and again, have the privilege of seeing the things from above and see the entire landscape, can actually bring that perspective. So those are our new vision and mission statement, and I hope you find them inspiring.
Thank you. Vittorio, let's, we use that vision and that mission to really crystallize where we wanted to focus our time and how to create and orient ourselves on how we deliver on this vast task. John, can you, share some themes on how we structured our approach? Because there's all these different working groups. We're now spinning up community groups that are all working on some narrow issues, but we needed to look at it across the piece.
Right, so we had to categorize the different work activities that we have, and we've been around for a long time, so we have some that are in the more mature, well, we have some that are kind of in the legacy space, OpenID 2, that while probably half of you in the room have used an OpenID 2 provider to do something like purchase an Amazon package, on a regular basis, OpenID 2 still around, still used on a daily basis, but like SAML, not developed anymore. But we are still, it's still our spec, but that's probably, that falls off the left edge of the diagram. We have the OpenID Connect core protocol, OpenID AB as was originally called, artifact binding, which we originally, when Nat and I started, we actually targeted to, one of our goals was to figure out how to do financial transactions, which we've actually, with FAPI, we've actually done surprisingly well, and using a lot of the original ideas that we had when we were converting from OpenID to OpenID Connect. These are fairly stable things in in the OpenID Foundation that are being nurtured along with our certification program, which for basic OpenID Connect and branching out now into the financial FAPI certification suites.
A quick note, 1,500 certifications done to date by the certification program. So it's grown up now and continuing to scale.
Right, so we have newer work that's coming along. I think Torsten Lautersted's in the back with guiding along the OpenID Connect for identity assurance, and more. Hi, Torsten.
And Mark's out there somewhere too.
more and more people are looking at that for, it's a way of looking at how to do identity proofing and communicate the results of those identity proofing things. So FIDO is looking at that as part of their identity proofing standards. A number of governments that kind of originally came out of financial services needing for to try and catch people like me that are doing potentially shady financial things, cross-border, know your customer stuff. So we have work in that, but that's expanding out. So that's newish work that we're growing. Fast-fed is sort of an old idea, which is really targeted more towards enterprises, allowing people to have standardized ways of connecting different SaaS providers together. Back in the olden days when I worked for Ping, it was, I think, something like 3 to 6 months to connect a SaaS provider to an enterprise. No kidding. So we want to get that down to minutes at the most to try and standardize things. So that applies to both OpenID Connect and SAML federations. We have Moderna, which we've been working with the telco operators. I don't know if Bjorn's here. No?
Not today.
But we have been working with the GSMA and the other phone operators to standardize a global system of OpenID Connect providers backed by telephone identities, and that's been picking up space. We have newer things like the GAIN initiative, which I don't know, you want to talk about?
He's talked. We're going to just watch out for time, folks. Got 10 minutes.
So GAIN is a new thing, and it seeks to be the third thing that's on your person. You have on your person a credit card, which is, when you think about it, a network of networks, a global network, a trust framework, if you will, with technical standards and legal requirements that allow for global interoperability of a credit card. You also have a mobile phone. Mobile phone is interoperable. You can use that phone in Dubai or Denver or Dallas. How does that happen? How do you have all these disparate systems joined up in some kind of a agreement, some kind of a trust framework that's global? What we seek to do through the GAIN initiative is something just like that, to create a scheme of schemes and begin to work on a globally interoperable network that uses identity at its core. So the Global Assured Identity Network Initiative is a remarkable thing. It began with a white paper signed by over 150 people. No organization. Its thesis is no new standards are required, that we have sufficient standards now to create a globally assured network. If we build on what's built, what many of you have helped build at the OpenID Foundation, at the Cloud Signature Consortium, at the Open Identity Exchange, we can collaborate and create the third scheme of schemes, if you will. It won't take as long as the decades that were required of the credit card industry or the 5 years that were required of the mobile operators. But we have a vision that sometime, most likely based on an open wallet, we'll be able to create a scheme of schemes, a GAIN network. So we invite you to participate in the proof of concept here at OpenID Foundation or the other GAIN initiatives. It's an example of the foundation taking on the leadership role that we talked about, that Vittorio described, that Gail is leading, and really try and work collaboratively with our colleagues and with all of you on something new and important.
Thanks, Don and John. So we're not going to finish this slide because there's too much going on and we have a lot of 18 sessions this week. I will invite and thank Nat, because I know you have to get on to your 11:30 talk, so thank you, Nat. The rest of you get to stay. Thank you, Nat. We'll see you at 11:30 at the Identity and Conflict session. And the punchline for this page is that this work gets done by, a few skeletal staff at the OpenID Foundation and a vast number of volunteers, all of whom are forest rangers. So watch this space. Maybe we should have some forest ranger hats and actually give those out to people as some small thank you. But this is all happening simultaneously thanks to the hard work of the community. We're just a little bit of a shout out for the 2 white papers we just released. So in March, we released the Open Banking, Open Data, and Financial Grade API white paper as a primer of what's happening with this space. What is this movement from open banking to open data? How do the standards fit in? What are the implementation considerations? We hope a very approachable read, for lay people as well as technologists. And then the OpenID for Verifiable Credentials paper, which is a first implementer's draft. We're using that as a vehicle to try and focus the community's attention on what real use cases are and how to achieve that convergence that Vittorio described earlier. What's good here is that there is some tension trying to work this through, but it's tension that's, I hope, constructive in trying to wrestle to ground how you do this stuff in practice. So the white paper here is a vehicle, and we warmly welcome feedback from the community to get that paper to a final draft. We also have 2 papers. The first that'll probably be published through the working groups. So the health white paper that Deb Bucci is leading will be published today to the HEART working group for feedback, and she's going to have a session later today and a listening session tomorrow on the themes of how all of these standards can apply to health, including the COVID challenges we mentioned. And then Open Banking and Open Data Going Global is a paper that's being written to look at that next generation. So after our primer, how do we achieve global interoperability of open banking and open data? What are the use cases that are going to drive that movement? How might it go about in practice? We definitely don't have all the answers for that one, but in the same way, we're trying to use the paper as a vehicle to get the community aligned on how that's possible and then engage with all of our government partners on trying to realize that, right? Various markets that are more mature, like the UK and Australia, are already thinking about how do we do this. Don, please, we would like to bring the next generation of contributors into this community and recognize our old friend. Tell us about this award.
Many of you may know the name Kim Cameron, who was a giant in our industry. Kim had a long and illustrious career and was a mentor to many people, a teacher to many people, including people up on this stage. The foundation mourned his passing, but we wanted to do something about it. So what we've decided to do is to create a series of grants, or scholarships, if you will, that would allow young people, academic researchers, and people that are at the beginnings of their career to attend conferences like this. So with Andy Hendel's leadership and the conference organizers here in Denver, as well as our colleagues in Berlin and other identity conferences, we're working together to provide the funding for students, academic and researchers to join these kinds of conferences so that we can create a new generation of independent thinkers and people that are interested in this field. So I just wanted to, again, thank those that are involved. Our friends at ID Pro have also joined us, as well as other organizations, in continuing this effort to keep young people involved in these conversations.
And are any of our recipients in the audience? All right, they're not with us. Okay, please stand. So please look out for Michael and Federico. Thank you so much. Congratulations. And please reach out and talk with them. Great community. Glad to have you in it. Thank you for your future contributions, as well as your contributions to date. Thank you, gentlemen. There's some water over there, John, if you need. Okay, got it. And so this week, you might need a picture of this one if you want to go to all these sessions. There's the ones in black are part of the formal agenda, and we'll cover deep dives on almost every topic that you heard us speak about today. We will also have the 4 sessions in blue. 3 are working group calls, our standard working group meetings. If you want to come along and join in person in Summit 2, tomorrow morning we'll have the FAPI working group call, followed by the OpenID Connect for Identity Assurance call, and then the Self-Sovereign Identities call with that OpenID Connect for Verifiable Credentials session at 8 o'clock. Completely a fly on the wall. You don't have to sign any paperwork to sit there. You're welcome to come along. And then the health listening session. If health is your bag and you're interested in those challenges, please come along tomorrow, 1 o'clock, to the health listening sessions. Those 4 in blue are not part of the formal agenda. We're using our breakout room for those. So please, you're all welcome to join any of these sessions and to ask us questions. We hope we have blown your mind. We hope you want to engage. We hope you would like a hat. And please learn, continue to contribute, be a member. Write me a note, director@openidfoundation.org. We have not had a chance to do Q&A. We're sorry for that, but we hope the substance was of value to you today. Thank you so much for your help.
So just to close off Gail's theme, only you can stop forest fires, so please join and/or participate.